was on my way home to spend a nice holiday with my family. Instead, I'm in a motel bed with a stranger.
So instead of Thanksgiving with his family, he's spending 3 days with the turkey.
Man, that trailer's. There's a lot of actually stuff in that trailer that's not in the movie. I don't know if you noticed that.
Yeah, there were a couple things.
Yeah, and it's got classic voiceover. Didn't sound like the. It sounded like the guy who usually does. Yeah, it sounded like him, but I knew it wasn't.
It's a guy.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, welcome to Movie Matters. I'm Kevin.
I'm Jake.
And today we're talking about the 1987 John Hughes film, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. I adore this movie. I've watched it ever since I was a little kid. It was probably, along with Terminator 2, it was probably one of the first R-rated movies I'd seen, which we'll get into that, why it's rated R in a bit. But my grandma at her house had this on VHS, and I would go over to her house and I'd be bored out of my mind, and like literally every time I went there, I would watch that movie just because it's great. I mean, I love John Candy. He's one of my all-time favorite actors of this era, of the 80s and 90s, and I don't know, he just felt like America's dad.
Yeah, and it's probably the only Thanksgiving movie or Thanksgiving-centric movie out there, at least in comedies that I can think of, if not just overall. But yeah, I mean, like, Steve Martin is unbelievably hilarious, and it's interesting to see him as a straight man in this movie, because usually he's the goofy guy in before this in roles that he's been in, and obviously John Candy is the more goofy person in this movie, which is more typical for his roles. We talked about him in the Blues Brothers, which he's also fantastic in. So yeah, it's a great movie, and like, you know, holiday rewatchability is through the roof. So
yeah, I agree. It's a movie I watch literally every single year because of Thanksgiving, and like you said, it's the only Thanksgiving movie that I can think about. I think, you know, Meet the Parents also has Thanksgiving in it. I was trying to think about other comedies that involve it, and I think that has it. There's one where he like slices his finger and like blood shoots all over the table while he's trying to cut the turkey. And I don't remember exactly what movie that is, but I think it's Meet the Parents. I don't remember, but yeah, I watch this movie every single year, and as we get older, we relate to it more and more, for sure. And every year I feel like I get more emotional with it, especially the ending. Not to jump too far ahead, but it's heartwarming and heartbreaking at the same time. And John Candy just plays that perfectly, and it's beautiful. I love it. It's such a good movie.
Like, John Hughes does a good job of doing that in his movies, where he kind of gives you like really crappy situations, but turns them into something like nice or beautiful or whatever.
Yeah.
You know, like The Breakfast Club is like, a similar situation, which I'm sure we'll watch at some point. And Ferris Bueller also is, does the same kind of thing near the end, taking this kind of like hopelessness that like all the teenagers feel, and then kind of like flipping it at the end and being like, I don't know, maybe it's okay. Maybe it's okay to just be a person and have fun or whatever.
Yeah, be a teenager.
Like,
yeah.
Yeah.
And that you bring up a good point. Like, most of his movies at this time or prior to this movie were all teenage, coming of age movies. This is his first kind of adult R-rated movie that takes a more serious tone, even though it's not a serious tone, if you will. But the comedy's so good in it, and he writes his characters very well, and I think his stories are very character centric, but they are situationally heavy, and that introduces the comedy for sure, especially with this movie. But it's really impressive because John Hughes, he wrote this movie in like 3 days, and that's how he writes a lot of his movies, from what I was kind of gathering when I was doing research on it. And this movie, he was inspired to write this because of an actual situation that was similar to him going through the turmoils of travel. He was on a flight from New York to Chicago. The flight was diverted to Wichita, Kansas, and it took him 5 days to get home. And that's literally what made him think of this story and want him to write it. And like I said, he wrote it in 3 days, which his average writing time was 3 to 5 days, including like 20-some rewrites, which is really impressive in my opinion. Because most movies go through development and they take a long time to write and come up with ideas, and people
like
go
years.
through drafts and stuff like that. But when you got an idea and you write, you just go for it. And that's kind of what he was saying. Is he's like, all these people, all these writers will be writing for like years, and they'll put the page down and come back to it later. And he was just like, I would just literally just write it all then and there, because he's like, the ideas were just flowing. Unlike Jack in The Shining.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I think this is a excellent movie. When I say this, I'm not downplaying how good it is, but like at the end of the day, this is a comedy, and its objective is to make you laugh and present you with that little heartwarming situation at the end. Like, he's not trying to write Shawshank Redemption, so like it makes sense. And like, even like his catalog of movies are about these like very simple premises that have some sort of like hopeful outcome, and like you don't need to dump a whole bunch of extra crap into that, and he does that extremely well.
Yeah, they're very simple.
Yeah.
And like, simple is good.
I mean, get home is like the premise of this movie, and it's like very well executed and straightforward. Yeah,
I can't stress this enough, and I've been saying this to a lot of my friends, and I'm sure you, is a way to win me over with the movie is have stakes, have good characters, have good writing, and like just hold my attention. Like, those are like the main things I care about. Is like, it's got to have some emotional stakes to it, and this movie has all that for the most part, and it just is definitely a classic. I'm sure a lot of people have seen this, and if they haven't, definitely watch it this Thanksgiving that's coming up. Like, it's so good.
Yeah, and like the stakes is component of it is super important, because like if Steve Martin's character didn't have a family, this movie would just be pointless.
Yeah,
like just a like middle-aged guy trying to get home to an empty house, like there's no emotional investment in that whatsoever. Like, who cares where he has his Thanksgiving? He's alone anyway. But the fact that he has a family that he's trying to get home to gives it like there's a goal, and you want him to like reach that goal, and then you feel the setbacks the same way that he does every time they get screwed over.
Yeah, definitely. And the only thing I would complain about this movie, and I feel like it happens to me every time I watch it, is the editing. And that's probably because this movie initially was much longer. It was like 3 hours almost upon the first cut. It was 3 hours and 40 minutes long. And Paul Hirsch, the editor, edited it down with John Hughes to 2 hours. And then that version was screened, and that's the one they used to edit the trailer that we just saw. which is the original trailer, and that's why there's a lot of deleted scenes in there. Then the movie was edited down to a very classic 80s hour and 33 minutes in order to, fill seats and keep going with the showings. There's apparently a longer version out there, but no one knows where it is. And if it is, because they shot like 600,000 feet of film, which is like twice the average industry in that time. And apparently it was locked away in a Paramount vault, the film, and probably now it has deteriorated, which is disappointing, because imagine a 3-hour cut. I mean, I'm glad it's a very brisk hour and a half, but it would kind of be brutal if it was 3 hours.
Yeah, and like we'll talk about this a little bit more, but my biggest complaint about the movie is I feel like the pacing kind of falters in like 2/3 of the way through. It starts to become repetitive. And that's the point in the movie where I lose a little bit of interest until the scene with the trucks, and then it gets you back in.
John Candy in the devil
turns
costume
into the devil. Yeah,
that's such a classic scene.
So funny. And like I like. I mean, we just talked about the Naked Gun, and like talk about like left field, like surrealist comedy. Like that's like so perfect because it doesn't fit at all otherwise in the movie, but it just drives that like point home so well.
And that's why it's so funny, because like if you think about it, all of John Hughes' comedies are never really too over the top, and that's a pretty over the top scene, but it adds so much to the comedy. Like it's just the quick cut of Steve Martin as a skeleton, and then John Candy as a skeleton as they're screaming, and then it cuts to Candy in devil costume laughing his head off, and like Steve Martin be like, "What the hell is going on?" It's so good. Like that's classic comedy, if you ask me.
And pairing that with the sequence right before that, where the people are yelling at them, and he's like, "Oh yeah, this guy's drunk," like drinking, like whatever,
yeah. The whole way they got
funny, there. And then it just goes like way overboard.
Yeah. Well, even
it's
before
a really
that
good build up.
It is because even before that, with him like, where Steve Martin's sleeping and he's playing the piano on the dashboard, listening to Mess Around, and he gets his jacket stuck and throws a cigarette in the back, and it's just like it builds and builds and builds and builds, and that's a lot of the movie is building and then creating that tension almost of like everything that can go wrong will go wrong.
Right. Yeah.
But what I was going to say earlier about the editing and pacing is the one thing when I was saying about how I watch it every time, I get lost in the time that's passing, because there's a scene where his daughter is at some sort of recital and she's like, "Today is Thanksgiving Day," but it's not, because the day passes and then the next day is Thanksgiving, and that always confuses me. And I always lose track of like the pacing, because it's like, I think the opening, it starts with like 2 days to Thanksgiving Day.
Right. But it feels like it's much longer than 2 days of time passing.
Yes.
It feels like it's closer to like 3 or 4.
Yes. And I always get lost in that.
They only actually go to sleep twice.
Yes.
But they drive at night. So it is actually 3 days, I think.
Yeah. So again, and with it, the movie being originally 3 hours, 40 minutes, and them editing it down, you can kind of tell that, because there's a scene towards the tail end of it, where they get pulled over by a cop, and they don't say it, but you can see on his uniform that it's the state of Wisconsin on his arm. And he's a Wisconsin state cop. And
so somehow they ended up in Wisconsin.
They overshot and by like 3 hours. And the cop tells them that in a deleted scene, and then they fight. And then if you see later when John Candy picks up Steve Martin in a semi truck, like the cow truck or whatever it is, with like the milk or something, like the dairy truck.
Yeah.
It looks like he has a black eye, John Candy, and I always was like, why is this like? What happened? Like, did he get in a fight with someone outside of the film and just has a black eye? But it's because of that scene where they overshoot Illinois
okay.
and go to Wisconsin that Steve Martin punches him in the face and he gets a black eye. So there's editing that, again, I get lost in it a little bit.
So I wonder if they trimmed down the timeline in order to fit the length of the movie.
100%.
And instead
100%.
of, having it be like the Monday before Thanksgiving that he flies home, it's that would be the Tuesday, right? Or the Friday before Thanksgiving. He was supposed to fly home in the original 4-hour cut, and they bumped it up, to try and make the timeline work a little bit better.
That makes sense. So
yeah.
But there's a lot of great cameos in this movie, too, especially with people who have worked with John Hughes before, like Ferris Bueller. We talked about that. There's Ferris's dad is in the intro with the Steve Martin, Neil Page's job at the marketing, where he's his coworker, and he's like, "You'll never make the 6." And that's, foreshadowing of the whole movie, which is cool. And then it cuts to him trying to get a cab, and Kevin Bacon is, trying to steal it from him, and it's just a very small cameo, which is awesome.
And this is like maybe at like Kevin Bacon's peak, like as famous, like because this is after Footloose.
Yep.
This is after what was the other movie that he did with Hughes?
She's Having a Baby.
Yeah,
that's
right before this movie, right?
Yeah, I believe so. And that's where Kevin Bacon was like, he had such a great time with Hughes on that movie, where he's like, "Oh, I just want to, any job you can give me, I'll take."
Yeah. So yeah, the 6 degrees grow from here.
Yeah, he's in everything. He relates to everything.
Yeah.
The announcer to the flights being canceled early on is Ben Stein, who plays the teacher, the boring teacher in Ferris Bueller, who's Bueller. Everyone knows that line, of course, but and that actor, but and then Edie McClurg, who plays the car rental attendant, which is another amazing scene in this movie. She's so good, and she improvised the whole speech about her on Thanksgiving, about Thanksgiving with her family and how she can't cook and all that, and it's so genius and so good.
The gobble gobble.
Yeah, that's just like she was directed by John Hughes to just piss off an already pissed off Steve Martin, and just imagine you being in that situation of just like already being impatient as is and waiting there ready to blow up, and she's just on the phone talking about nonsense.
Well, then she throws up the dismissive finger to him too.
Yeah,
like, give me 1 second, this is more important.
Yeah. So good.
Yeah, it's pretty fantastic.
And then just the berating of the F word, and the only reason this movie is rated R is such a good scene. And he says it 19 times. And again, if he didn't say it, this movie would be PG probably, maybe even G.
I think they say asshole once, and maybe shit.
John
maybe
Candy,
shit once.
John Candy says asshole. He's like, "You insensitive asshole."
Right. Other than that, I mean, this movie could be PG probably.
Yeah, definitely.
But it does work like unbelievably well, because that's kind of the breaking point for Neil's character, is like that's when he completely like goes off the rails, and when things begin to also escalate like off the rails, and like that's probably I think that's the first time that we see him like get more than just irritated.
Yeah. All the built up aggression finally comes to its climax at that scene, and he just fucking just is tired of it. Yeah, it's funny. Steve Martin always, even in this movie, he looks old just because of his white hair. And
he always looks. It's hard to tell how old he exactly is in like anything, but
yeah.
Because even in oh god, what's the show he's in right now on Hulu?
Only Murders in the Building.
Yeah, like he doesn't look that different between now and Planes, Trains, and Automobiles.
Yeah, I know.
You can tell he's a little bit older, but like they could be maybe like 5 years apart, or they could be like 30 years apart.
Yeah, it's impressive-ish. Like,
yeah,
it's interesting. But yeah, the whole scene, just the comedy escalation between John Candy and Steve Martin is so good. Just with everything, just him being the chatty guy on the airplane, not wanting to shut up, and Steve Martin wanting to get some peace and quiet,
and not having the self-awareness to realize that he is the guy that he's complaining about is just so good.
And the fact that he just takes his shoes off and his socks off in the middle of an airplane, like I've had that happen to me. Like I've had some like people like take their shoes off, and I'm like, it's so disgusting. Like it's so disrespectful too. And like him waving the sock in Steve Martin's face is so good. It's like, how much can you put up with? And then it escalates even more when they share a room and a bed together and a bathroom together. That is pure comedy, in my opinion. The whole, hey, do you want to take a shower? No, like what the hell? Like they play, like that, and then them waking up together, cuddling, and he's kissing his ear and holding hands, and his other hands between two pillows, which is his asshole. Like it's very, very good comedy. And I'm surprised they showed that in the trailer, because like that's such a like classic line and classic scene. I feel like that might even be like the most classic scene of the movie, at least for me.
That's definitely one of the best jokes in the movie.
Yes,
for sure.
Yeah. So I mean, I get it. They want to show that, and that's how you bring it. Again, it's trailers cut these days give away a lot of the best parts, and that was one of the best parts. So they want to, it's good marketing, definitely. But it's again, I want to go back to Candy's acting with how he's heartbreaking and heartwarming at the same time, where finally Steve Martin gets fed up with him about when he's cracking his joints and trying to clear his sinuses. Sorry, and
sorry.
I love that scene. He finally gets fed up, and he just starts berating him and saying all these mean things. And John Candy's just like, I like me. My wife likes me, and like I'm the real article. That's what you get. And it's like you feel bad for him, and you never hate him in any of these situations. And I love that, and that's great character development. And it's almost like he's the villain in the movie.
Yeah,
he's the one.
He's like the eternal optimist, and like. Sometimes, especially in stressful situations, those people are like the worst to be around. But at the same time, it's very difficult to dislike them. Like you can get irritated and you can get angry, but like you'd never hate those people, because a lot of times they're the ones that actually keep things going forward. Even in the face of like total defeat. But like to your point, like. He's incredibly sympathetic, because all he's trying to do is be a nice guy,
Yeah.
Like that's
And it's
that's
John
just
Candy.
who he is, and he's just trying to help Neil get home, and like it's always not the most efficient at it, but it
Yeah.
like you said, you can't hate him for trying.
Yeah. And there's another moment that is just so, it's very subtle, and I noticed it this time watching it even more so than I have in my previous viewings, is when John Candy and Steve Martin are at the diner after John Candy had sold shower curtain rings to like everyone at that station. They finally have some money to get a hot meal, and Steve Martin's like, "Hey, when we put our heads together," and like when he says that, John Candy like brightens up. He's like,
Mhm.
oh, like we're like he likes me, like this is
Mhm.
great. But then Steve says we get nowhere.
Mhm.
And you see just the defeat and sadness on John Candy's face, and it's so heartbreaking, because you're like, all this guy wants is a friend.
Yeah.
But going back to his job, like how is that a job? Like that's such,
Yeah.
how did John Hughes come up with that? That's not even a thing. Like
Mm-hmm. Well, and like number one, it's funny because it's like
yes,
completely random and like fairly unnecessary. Like, why would you only sell shower rings and not like shower rods or shower curtains or like all the other
yeah,
components?
it's very niche.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
It's like it's ridiculously niche.
yeah,
But also he has this trunk that's like enormous for these like 2-inch plastic rings. Like how many
That-
rings is he selling at a given
Yeah.
time to
That
have
weigh
this
nothing.
massive trunk, right?
yeah,
And like there's always multiple people carrying the trunk. So like it's got to be heavy. It's like it's but like I mean it's part of the comedy and part of the the gag
Yes.
with his job. So it that's also executed extremely well.
Yes, but also, I mean, you do find out that he is homeless in the end, and that could
Mhm.
be all his lifelong possessions.
Right.
And again, that's another heartbreaking thing you find out about his character.
Mhm.
Yeah, it gets me every time for sure.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about those conspiracy theories
The
you told me about?
conspiracy theories, yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of like conspiracy theory isn't like the right way to describe it. It's more like alternate fan fictions.
Fan fiction.
Yeah. So like the first one is that Dell Candy's character is some sort of con artist, and throughout these misadventures he's trying to extract something from Neil, and like there's multiple times where you kind of get glimpses at this. The big one is there's a couple big ones. The first one is when he's selling the shower curtains to the people in the bus station because he's lying through his teeth about what they are and
Yeah.
charging kind of ridiculous amounts of money for shower curtains. And then the second time is when you find out that he stole Neil's credit card, which is a thing that a lot of people point to, that he's like a con man and he just keeps getting caught, or he's just really bad at it. And then at the end, he gives this the speech about being homeless and his wife is dead and blah blah blah, and that like maybe his end goal is just to like bum a place to live,
Yeah.
and move in with Neil, and just kind of coast off of him or something.
Yeah. Leech.
So that's theory one. Theory two is much darker. So it centers around the trunk, which we've already talked about, appears to be extremely heavy. And the theory is that it's extremely heavy because John Candy's wife's body is in the trunk and has been for 8 years, and that he killed her either on purpose or on accident. and he just lugs her around with him. And there's a few things that people use to point to that theory. The biggest one is that you never actually see inside the trunk.
Yeah.
The best glimpse we get is the bottom of the lid. It's extremely heavy, as we've noted. Two people are carrying it almost at all times when it's being moved.
And if a body's in there, that's heavy.
If a body's in there, it's heavy. And then the other one is the way he. Oh crap! I can't remember the third big thing. Yeah, I don't know. There's one other one that's like Google it, read the Reddit threads on it. It's fun in a grotesque and like morbid kind of way, but yeah, I mean it's just like a goofy thing. Like obviously, John Hughes did not intend for that to be the plot, a subplot in the movie. So, but it's just like one of those things where like if you've seen the movie like 20 times. And you just want to look for something new, like look through these all borderline true crime Reddit threads where they're nitpicking this movie apart to try and prove that Dell's like a serial killer or something.
Yeah,
it's
and
pretty
like
funny.
He knows like all these random people too.
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
He knows the cab driver. That's what's his name? The cab driver. It's like some. Boy, I forgot what it was, but Doobie,
Yeah.
Doobie, the cab driver, and like he knows like the hotel, like all the hotel owners and everything. He's like, oh, I sold him a pair of shower curtain rings
because he moves from motel to motel all across the country, which is like a little serial killer.
Yeah. She's been dead for 8 years.
Yeah.
Like,
but
it's pretty fucked up.
I mean, it's yeah, it is. But I mean, it's like it's just one of those like goofy things that like is fun, kind of.
Yeah. And I mean, I love when they finally John Candy finally breaks Steve Martin's character. He finally breaks him down after the car sets on fire and they're trying to get home. And they stay at the hotel, and Steve Martin finally lets John Candy in, literally and figuratively, by allowing him to come stay in the hotel room with him. And they get drunk and have a blast. And he's like, oh, I feel like I'm at summer camp. And it's just like, cool, now we're getting somewhere. And then cut to later, they finally get to Chicago, and they go their separate ways. And the montage of Neil's thoughts is perfect filmmaking, in my opinion. It's got the classic 80s score. You just see him kind of smiling and thinking about his family and what a beautiful, meal it's going to be. And then he realizes everything that's happened and what Dell has said about, oh, I haven't been home in years. And Marie's been dead for 8 years. And then you get the truth that she's truly been dead and he's homeless, and it's sad. And then you cut to them walking down the street together holding the trunk, and it's just like, okay, cool, we're gonna feel good.
Well, and then it flashes back to some of like the most like horrific moments of the trip, and he like laughs about them. He's like, I'm almost home, like I can now like look back and be like, this was kind of ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's like, it's not
great.
It's not all like anger and rage anymore, and like after their bonding moment, he's kind of like, oh shit, like
he's a good guy.
Right.
Yeah. And then the ending again gets me, and I almost cry watching it every time, just because John Candy is again he was America's dad, and he passed away a long time ago, and he's been gone a while. But the freeze frame of John Candy smiling and watching as he watches, Steve Martin and his family reunite, you know, just because he thinks about his wife. And it's sad. It's just like this guy has nowhere to go, and it's just the freeze frame of it. And then again, knowing John Candy, you know, died at kind of a young age from a heart attack and left his family, you know, obviously, and they do that in Uncle Buck too, which I can't wait to get to that movie. And it just, again, that they freeze frame on his face, and it gets me every time. I don't know. It's just, I love John Candy.
Oh man, you're being a bummer.
I know. It's sad, man. He died too young, like him, Chris Farley, like all those unfortunately overweight guys that had.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think John Candy had a drug problem, but Chris Farley did, and like they, you know, a lot of them died from heart attacks and stuff like that. And
yeah,
it's also sad.
No, go ahead, finish.
It's also sad that John Hughes died of a heart attack when he was like only in his late 50s. And it's sad to hear about how he was like a recluse at the end of his life and like didn't want to deal with anyone. So,
yeah, which is interesting for somebody that like hope was kind of like a major theme throughout like all of his movies.
Yeah.
Or at least like like optimism or hope or like something like that is kind of like a main thread through almost all of his movies. So yeah. That is a bit sad.
I do appreciate that they're all Chicago centric. Obviously you and I are both from Chicago, and it just adds a little more relatability to us, at least in my opinion. But
which it's one thing I noticed is the house is not the Home Alone house.
Yeah,
it's an identical house, probably because they're in the same neighborhood. That's
actually what it said. Yeah,
I would be willing to guarantee that they're both in Lake Forest or
Winnetka,
wherever
I
they
think,
are.
or Glenview.
Winnetka?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, same. You know, it's funny because
same exact layout.
Yeah.
And yeah, same exact like everything except like the wallpaper's different. Like some of the other like the colors of things are different. But yeah. It's otherwise funny. It's identical.
Yeah, all Hughes's movies are very, you know, upper middle class, more middle class, you know, suburban, north suburban Chicago, like nice house, all that stuff. Like, and it's just like that's all his movies, and it also reminds me of like Risky Business a bit with the, you know, that being in Illinois and everything. So,
well, that's like when you think of the 80s, that's what you think of is the like
great point.
Middle to upper middle class suburban neighborhood experience kind of. You know, like even like Stranger Things like captures that extremely well, you know. And, you know, like I mean, we're gonna see it throughout this podcast as like the backdrop for a lot of movies. So
yeah, agreed. I definitely I rate this movie pretty high. It's one of my all-time favorite comedies. Naked Gun is also up there that we just did, but this movie's instant classic for me. It's a great feel-good holiday movie. I know I said a lot of depressing things about it, John Candy, but it's a great movie.
A lot of the best like holiday movies in particular are like bittersweet.
Yeah.
So
like,
you know,
like Die Hard.
Yeah. I mean, hey, at the end, the policeman learns that he can pull his gun on someone and shoot him.
Yeah.
So big lesson learned.
Yeah.
Oops, I just spoiled Die Hard. Sorry, everyone.
Which we will get to that. I know we've talked about it a lot. It's coming, we promise.
We're waiting for the appropriate season.
Yes. We're almost there. Wink, wink. So, but definitely watch this one on Thanksgiving if you haven't already, and like I might even watch it again, literally on Thanksgiving, just because it's so good. But we hope you guys enjoyed it, and thanks for listening.
Yeah, next week we're gonna be watching Ran, film by Akira Kurosawa. So this will be our first foreign film. Maybe our last. We'll see. But this is a Japanese movie. Supposed to be one of the best movies of the 80s, if not like of all time. So I'm excited to watch it. It's supposed to be awesome.
Hope it holds up.
Big like war epic, so it's pretty long, but I'm sure we'll have a lot of good stuff to talk about.
Yeah, I'm excited for that. So stay tuned.
Yep. See you next week.